All right, welcome to the Revolutionary Reading Series with Professor Peyto, where we take the theory off the shelf and put it where it belongs, in the streets, in our bodies, and in our breath. So today we're doing the Lord's work, not Sunday school, but sacred rage, queer knowing, and the power of the erotic as survival. So we're talking Audre Lorde, and we're going to talk about two of her most cited essays, The Master's Tools Will Never Dismantle the Master's House, and Uses of the Erotic as Power. So before we get into it, I want to say that Audre Lorde's writing is radically inclusive in spirit, especially for her time. She was a Black lesbian feminist writing in the 70s and 80s, and her work directly challenged the narrow, white, cishet definitions of woman that dominated mainstream, and I'm talking about white feminism. But Lorde was writing before the rise of trans and non-binary visibility in feminist theory. So she doesn't explicitly talk about trans women or gender as a spectrum the way that we do now. So while her work is expansive and rooted in lived experience and embodied power, it doesn't necessarily include the language or explicit affirmation of trans and non-binary identities. So are these works like specifically trans inclusive? By today's standards, no, not explicitly, but a lot of her concepts can be and are applied in ways that affirm trans and non-binary experiences, especially if we read them through a modern, expansive lens, right? I think that while cancel culture has its moments and its pros, what we're not going to do is cancel Audre Lorde. Okay, that's what we're not going to do. So that said, many trans and non-binary people have found a lot of resonance in Lorde's work because of her definitions of power, of identity, and erotic knowing, which are all rooted in felt experiences rather than fixed categories. Right? She says, we have been raised to fear the yes within ourselves, and that yes is one that transcends gender. Okay, so let's start with the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. Put simply, that is both the main takeaway from the essay, but also the essay's title. And it basically means that you cannot create real transformative change using the same values or methods or institutions or systems that uphold oppression. So let's sit with that. Who is the master? The master would be the people or institutions in power, right? What is the house? The house would be the system that they've built to maintain that power. And the tools are the tactics that the system gives us to survive within the system, but not challenge it, right? Think like politeness, respectability, tokenism, assimilation, competition, things like that. So Lorde is talking about systems of power, right? Patriarchy, white supremacy, capitalism, the whole machinery that keeps people divided and exhausted and unequal. And the master is the one who benefits the most from these systems, right? It's the capitalists. And the house is the world that they've built with those tools of competition, control, violence, politeness. I'm talking about like when it keeps people silent. So imagine you're in a house built entirely on systems of domination, right? Designed with rooms for hierarchy and surveillance and obedience and extraction. And every beam in that house is placed to serve the master. Right? The tools used to build it, which could be competition or individualism, right? Those are calibrated to maintain that order. But you can't use those same tools to build something liberatory, right? You can't use white supremacy to build a liberatory movement. That's the whole critique of white feminism. So you might rearrange the furniture or you might paint the walls, but the whole foundation remains intact. And this is essentially a philosophical argument about means and ends, right? You can't reach liberatory ends with oppressive means. So Lorde's point parallels critiques of instrumental rationality in thinkers like Adorno and Horkheimer. I don't know if I'm saying that right, from the Frankfurt School. But they argued that reason, when shaped by domination, can't free us. It just creates more efficient forms of control. And it also aligned with Foucault's idea that power doesn't just repress, it produces truths and norms and behaviors. So if you're using the tools the master gave you, you're still operating within his logic, right? You're reproducing his worldview, even if you're claiming to resist it. And Lorde's genius was to show that this isn't just theoretical, it's deeply embodied and lived. If your liberation strategy relies on silencing emotion or policing difference or maintaining hierarchy, you're not dismantling the system, you're just repainting it or rearranging it a little bit, right? So when white liberal feminism tokenizes one black woman on a panel and calls it diversity and inclusion, that's using the master's tools. When corporations slap rainbow logos on products during Pride, but donate to anti-LGBTQ politicians, that's the master's tools, right? When diversity initiatives ask marginalized people to assimilate rather than transform the space, that is the master's house dressed in new wallpaper, right? Real liberation demands a new architecture entirely and different tools, right? Community, emotion, pleasure, care, rage, refusal. You can't use the logic of oppression to end oppression. You can't compete your way to liberation, and you can't shame or exclude people into freedom, which is sort of I would say, a good transition to talk about her other famous essay, Uses of the Erotic. If you hear the word erotic and it makes you picture like a dim room with silk sheets, let's pause, because that's not what she's talking about. Lorde defines the erotic as a deep well of feeling, a knowing in your body, a source of joy, power, and alignment. So she says the erotic isn't just about sex, it's about presence and truth and fully felt experience. Right? It's the part of you that says this is not enough or this is everything before your brain even catches up. It's about feeling, knowing that deep embodied power that arises from within. So this is what she writes. The erotic is a measure between the beginnings of our sense of self and the chaos of our strongest feelings. It is an internal sense of satisfaction to which, once we have experienced it, we know we can aspire. For having experienced the fullness of this depth of feeling and recognizing its power, in our honor and self-respect, we can require no less of ourselves, right? So what Lorde is saying here is that the erotic is that deep embodied sense of rightness, of truth and feeling and aliveness that connects our identity or our sense of self to our full emotional capacity, right? The chaos of our strongest feelings. So once you experience that depth of feeling, a moment of real satisfaction, alignment, or truth, right? You're really seen and you're really heard or whatever it is, right? You realize what's possible. And then once you know that feeling, you can't unknow it. You can't go back to just numbing out or settling. Out of self-respect, you start to expect that fullness from your life, your relationships, your work, your world. And once you know that kind of pleasure or joy or aliveness, you can look for it. But even more than that, you demand it, right? Because it becomes your new standard and you stop accepting less. But this is not about indulgence or material or superficial pleasure, right? Maybe material, but not superficial, right? It's about being so in tune with yourself that you honor your desires and don't let the world flatten you. The erotic is a well of joy, of clarity, and power. And the world is just terrified of that, right, as it's set up. It wants us to consistently numb out and buy more things for those quick hits of happiness, right? Especially when that power lives in Black women or queer people or really anyone who's supposed to be silent and grateful, right? So what happens? That erotic power gets dulled. It gets rebranded. It turns into porn for profit or shoved into shame, right? Because people who are deeply connected to their own aliveness are not easy to manipulate. And Lorde says, reclaim that. Reclaim your feelings. Reclaim pleasure. Reclaim the full range of your being. Because a revolution that doesn't include the erotic will burn you out before it frees you at all, right? So how do these essays speak to our world right now? Here's a few of my thoughts. If you're in a school or a gym or a church or a workplace where you're told to stay quiet for the good of the group, Lorde's with you. If you've been in rooms that talk about diversity but still punish you for being a little too gender nonconforming, a little too Black, a little too whatever, Lorde's with you. If you've been surviving but not thriving or like functioning without actually feeling, Lorde is telling you that your joy, your sensation, and your desire for more is not selfish. It is sacred. And if you've been told to use the master's tools, right, like wanting a promotion within the existing system rather than recognizing that this system is exploiting those below, right? Something like that, right? Lorde is reminding you it's okay to pick up a fucking sledgehammer instead. So, yeah, let's do that. That's today's reading. Audre Lorde did not write for institutions. She wrote for us, for the ones who feel everything and were told that that's what makes us weak, for the ones who've tried to make change from inside the house only to realize it's fucking time to burn the house down. So thanks for being here. If this resonated with you, share it with someone else who's building something outside the blueprint. And in the name of rage, the erotic, and the holy Lord, amen. Class is dismissed, but the revolution is just getting started. This has been Professor Peyto reminding you theory is survival. See you next time.